Alan, thank you so much for being here. Your background is so fascinating and spans so many different industries: finance, sales, higher ed, hospitality, comedy. And you are a speaker, a facilitator, an educator. You're a senior consultant at Adaptive Challenge Consulting.
Yes.
So, what are you doing now? And how have all of those experiences shaped you now as a leader and teacher and facilitator?
That's a great question. And thank you for having me on. This is exciting. So, what am I doing now? I run two businesses and I moonlight in a third. And so, I'll tell you the ones that are not my consulting business. The one I moonlight in is I'm a part time travel agent for
Mm,
fun. It's like tax breaks and discounts and fun. Then I
that sounds
also own,
great.
oh, it's amazing. It's amazing. I also own a wildly successful Etsy shop. And so, my Etsy shop in 2020 made it to the top 5% of Etsy shops in the world. We were featured in BuzzFeed. It was this big thing. And the Etsy shop was the financial bridge I needed to transition from a regular career into my consulting career. And so
Mhm.
my Etsy shop really was right place, right time, right idea. It's just like lightning struck.
Yeah.
And my Etsy shop took off like crazy. And that helped me sort of get out of what I used to do, which is called student affairs. And I
Mhm.
can talk about that in a second, but into what I do now, which is I do keynotes and I do workshop facilitation and I do longer, deeper dive consulting with companies and educational institutions and nonprofits. And it's all about leadership development. It's all about so many times if you are in a tech business and everybody in your organization is programmers, you'll take the coolest, best programmer and make them a manager. Well, that
Mhm.
doesn't mean they've studied how to lead, or a teacher and you make them the assistant principal, or, so there's so many times when the best person who's at that mid-level range just gets promoted, but nobody stops and says, hey, should we get training about leadership? And so I work with a lot of people where it's like the what they call the vice presidents or the C-suite. But I also love my favorite thing is working with what I call the up and coming leaders. It because so many times when I'm working with vice presidents on leadership development, how to more effectively communicate, developing emotional intelligence, all of these things. So many times they're like, I wish I had known this 10 years ago. And I'm like, great, hold that thought. Who is it in your organization who 10 years from now might be in your seat? Let's go do this with them. Let's go
Right.
train them before they need it, because that way it'll be less messy and they'll be better bosses. I've had amazing bosses and not amazing bosses and everything in between. And I'm sure we all have, right?
Yeah, and I feel like I've felt that way personally, where, I was a really strong individual producer and I'm outgoing. And so the next step was management. And I'll be honest, like the first team that I managed, they were great. I wasn't a great leader. Like we produced because we came together, but I think I learned so much from my failures or just lack of experience, just not knowing exactly what to do. And it was sort of trial by error, which isn't great for your team. I mean, it's not ideal. And I hear this over and over again. But before we get too far into that, now I'm
Yeah.
curious, what is your Etsy shop?
So it's called Happy Place Designs. For a long time, it was called Happy Place Signs. But so I'm a big fan of Disney World. And my kid and I don't know, 10 years ago, made this little arrow in our backyard. We calculated the miles on Google Maps, how far it is from our home to Disney World. And we made this little thing with some stain and a pen. And we tried to copy the Disney font ish and how many miles to Disney. And so then I thought, wow, I wonder if other people would like that. A little arrow pointing to your happy place. And so I got
Yeah.
a laser machine. You've seen these things, glow forges. They're on, like, you can get them in a craft store.
Yeah.
And then I got a second glow forge because business was picking up. And then I got an industrial laser. And then I got a second industrial. And so now I've got four lasers. I've got two laser assistants. I've got a packing person. It's this whole business. And it started with these little arrows to your happy place, because everyone has a happy place, right?
Yeah.
And so it's Cancun. It's the most fun ones are ones where somebody will say, I would an arrow to the Shire and Mordor. And these are locations from the Lord of the
Lord of
Rings.
the Rings, yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, the Shire. I'm like, oh, that's not on Google Maps. And so sometimes they're like, I want it to, a Harry Potter to
Hogwarts or
to
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hogwarts, to Hogwarts. And I'm like, Hogwarts isn't real. So you're going to have to tell me how many miles you want. And so in the pandemic, what's so interesting is in the pandemic, when people couldn't travel, a little arrow that reminds you of your happy place, suddenly it took off. I mean, you wouldn't believe it. And the one other funny thing I'll tell you, because you mentioned earlier failures, and I have some
Hmm.
great failures I'd like to share if we have time.
Sure.
But this is not a failure. This random dude in Ohio was ordering a little sign. It was like, to the haunted mansion. And
Uh-huh.
so I did the miles and I sent it to him. Then a week later, he ordered another one with slightly different miles. And I'm like, okay. And then he ordered another one with, again, slightly different miles. And I wrote to him and somebody, I said, I'm happy to keep selling you the same sign, but are you not happy with it? Are you okay? Is everything all right? He said, yeah, I run my own retail business and I'm marking your stuff up and reselling it. And that guy in 2020 brought me a lot of business. And so now I have these retailers, and which is weird that I'm
Yeah.
making things in bulk and sending it to them, or they're reselling or whatever. And then also my wife, I should say, my wife also has an Etsy shop, and I just opened a second Etsy shop. So we have a lot.
Cool.
My wife does tie dyes. Hers is Twisty Mama's tie dyes. And then my newest one is called the Good Trouble Crew. And if you know the phrase good trouble, then you probably know what that one's about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I'm glad we took this little detour because you're also an author. I failed to mention that of all your multi-hyphenates, and you're really getting people to their happy place. And one of the things I was so fascinated by is your work in emotional intelligence. So can
Yeah.
you talk about what the heck is emotional intelligence? I think we talk about that a lot, but what is
Right.
it? At least how do you define it? And why is this truly the foundation of effective leadership?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'll start by backing up
Sure.
to the Industrial Revolution, right? And so at some
Obviously, that's where I thought you were going.
obviously. And so when you think about in the US what was happening, right? The big question facing managers and leaders was, how can we do things more efficiently? And you have Ford making an assembly line, and that revolutionized how automobiles were made. McDonald's, like before McDonald's was around, people would cook cheeseburgers one at a time. And then McDonald's was like, hold on, friends, we're going to make a grill that can cook like 24 at a time on the top and the bottom. And so the Industrial Revolution leaders, what they needed to know was, how can you get a group to work efficiently? But then some things changed. In World War II, we got Rosie the Riveter coming in, right? In World War II, women were entering the workforce in huge new numbers. By the end of World War II, more Black people, more Latino people were entering the workforce in huge new numbers. And so suddenly our workforce was becoming way more diverse, but there were already norms on what was professional, right? We
Mhm.
already had all these norms that had been established by people that look like me, like white dudes. And those norms aren't bad, but they were suddenly very incomplete. And actually, some of them are bad. So some of them, they're not bad just because white people made them, but they are incomplete because our workforce got a lot more diverse. It just meant that the old toolbox of what leaders needed was outdated, and we needed new norms and new ways to think about things. And then also the millennials, love the millennials, because the millennials, the boomers lived to work in a sense, right? And I saw this thing on LinkedIn once where boomers join a company, Gen Xers join a profession, and millennials build a life and then work a profession into it. And I'm like, yes, yay, thank you for doing that, because that's benefited all folks. And the millennials were like, yeah, hey, I'm going to come to work, but I'm still a human being.
Yeah.
And other generations, I think the baby boomer generation in general was just happy to work, and they thought this was what was expected. And so they would take whatever leadership was given, right? And so emotionally intelligent leadership, the reason we need it is because it's so much more of a diverse working world, right?
Mhm.
As far as what it is, I mean, you can look up a lot of different lists, and there's a lot of different lists. What the thing that drives me is I've gotten a bunch of degrees, but I'm not really an academic deep down in my bones. And so I've read what the academic literature says about emotionally intelligent leadership. And then I've just worked with companies where different bosses and managers have these ideas, or LinkedIn articles, or things that are more in the business world. And so there's certain things that you almost always see. Listening and communication is huge. I think listening is one of the most important things in leadership. Empathy is important. Self-awareness is important. The growth mindset is the idea that we all make mistakes. We all have failures. The question is, do we lean into shame and embarrassment on those things, or do we lean into what can we learn on those
Mhm.
things? And with organizations, some people were taught to feel ashamed of mistakes and feel embarrassed by mistakes, and some others were taught to amplify that shame and embarrassment. And as a work culture, organizations can stop and sit in a room and go, do we want to be like that? Or what if we treated every mistake like it could be a learning opportunity to help us get better, right?
Mhm.
The growth mindset is another key part. And then intercultural competence is also important, because unless everyone I'm leading is exactly like me, I need to be humble about my own culture and be patient with and curious about other cultures. There's all this DEI has become very charged in the media for reasons that are more about, I think, media hype and less about substance. But at the end of the day, if you lead people who aren't exactly like you, that's diversity. It's there. It's in your workplace, no matter what. It's just there. And my team and I in the consulting space, we don't do quote unquote DEI training, but we're not going to pretend that in every group of leaders that there are not men and women and white people and black people and Asian people and members of the LGBTQ community and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're not going to pretend that we're not all complex people. We are the whole time, whether there's labels and specific trainings or not. These concepts are just woven into what we do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Love how you described the different generations. And when you stop and think about boomers who were born in like the 40s through the 60s, I mean, it's mind-boggling how different the world was and everything
Yeah.
that they experienced. And, I have
Yeah.
two kids, and my daughter will be like, in the 1900s, like when I talk about my childhood, and I'm like, oh my God. But, like eventually they'll be there too. They'll look at millennials and be like, what the heck, you guys, so
Yeah.
bringing all of these different generations together, much less socioeconomic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, racial and ethnic backgrounds, just all of it. I like that you don't shy away from it. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily saying it's bad. Nothing about this is bad, but we need to acknowledge it, and this is how
Yeah.
we move through it. Can you talk at all about belonging and how that works with emotional intelligence?
Yeah. So organizations, so people want to feel as though they belong, right? And
Hmm.
we see this culturally, we see this in tribalism, and it's everything from what sports team you love, maybe, or what political party you're a part of, or what state you're from. Trust me when I say, if you get it on the topic of barbecue,
Hmm.
The people in Texas, the people in Tennessee, the people in North Carolina, and the people in South Carolina will go to war. I mean,
Yeah.
there will be conflict over, first of all, what meat is it made out of, and second of all, how do you prepare it? And so people want to belong. It's a universal thing. And so, considering that most of us spend as much time at work as we do at home, one of the questions is, can you find a place where you fit? There was a guy in the 70s named John Holland, who's sort of the grandfather of career counseling. And he said that before him, a lot of people were like, oh, there's good jobs and there's bad jobs. A doctor and a lawyer, that's a good job.
Mhm.
Sanitation worker is a bad job. And the dude was like, stop it, y'all, stop. There's good jobs and bad jobs for you. And there's good jobs and bad jobs for other people. So he came up with this concept. If you ever seen the Venn diagram, the three interlocking circles, he goes, if you can find a place that fits your values, your interests, and your abilities, you can find some good happiness. You can find that sense of belonging, right? And so values, like, what are my values? And what are interests? What are my interests and my abilities, right? And so if I'm good at computer programming, but I'm joining an organization that does not need a computer programmer, my abilities don't align.
Right.
If I'm a passionate environmentalist and I'm going to work for a diesel manufacturing company, that might not align. If I'm very interested in nature and my company is more like indoors, so finding where those things fit is part of belonging. But another huge part is the cultural aspect. And again, kind of like I alluded to, in our history in the US, white people and white men specifically were driving what's professional at work. So one of the things in my book is, if anybody listening Googles emotional intelligence, like the list, you'll see 10 or so different lists. And one of the things that you'll see on most of them, if not all of them, is emotional management. That emotional management is part of emotional intelligence, that managing your emotions at work is part of it. Well, the deeper I got into reading what the academic people say, my 20 years helping organizations, my sort of desire to, be a pro-feminist man and be aware of my privilege as a white guy and all those things. When I started thinking about this, I was like, managing our emotions for whose benefit? Who decided how much emotion's okay at work? And when was that decided? And is this a distinctly dude thing? Did guys sort of unofficially decide in the Industrial Revolution how much emotion is okay to have at work? And then as women enter the workforce, just say, oh, yeah, these are the norms. Y'all got to follow with us. And so in my book, I don't talk about managing your emotions. I talk about navigating the emotional expectations of others. And it's sort of the same thing in a way, like when it comes to what you do when you go to work Monday, it's sort of the same idea, but it does flip the script a little bit. It does say, hey, managing my emotions is something that I should do, but to manage my emotions sort of just per the whims of some culture that I might not have ever been a part of or got to participate in, there's more to it than that. And so to me, that's one of those aspects that I think people talk about, but needs to be talked about on a deeper level.
One of the things that strikes me is especially this idea of a male loneliness crisis and epidemic. And I don't know that it's loneliness. I think it is emotional management and
Yeah.
navigation. And we are still so stuck in this box of what is masculinity.
Yeah.
And if you take it a step out, so much of our workplace environment is stuck in this idea of masculinity. And
It is.
I will tell you, when I started, 20 some years ago, I thought to be professional was to be aggressive. And like, fortunately, I worked in an environment, I had good supervisors, I, had self-exploration and now have navigated for myself of what it means to be a leader and how I can show up as a leader
Uh-huh.
authentically. But it's really fascinating how that has infiltrated so many different parts of our culture, but certainly the workplace. And I guess one of the questions that I have for you is, and we'll talk about privilege in a little bit, but when people sort of have that immediate resistance to this,
Yeah.
emotional intelligence, oh, here we go, privilege, oh, here we go, anti-man. And that's not what we're saying. But
No.
when people sort of had that initial reaction, and I
Yeah.
think it's
Yeah.
fair, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Like these ideas can be really challenging. And sometimes, like myself, I was like, ugh, I'm not really showing up so great. So like
Yeah.
how, I don't know what there's a question there, but can you talk about that a little bit of like how to navigate that?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. And so this is the thing. Almost everybody listening to this podcast has some kind of privilege, right?
Sure.
And so if you go back a minute to when we were talking about the growth mindset is, okay, if you make a mistake, don't lean into shame and guilt and shaming others. If you make a mistake, learn from it. Well, so when you think about having privilege or, like saying something that's culturally insensitive, Lizzo, there's a great hip hop artist named Lizzo who also
Hmm.
plays the flute. I'm a
Hmm.
band nerd, so I love that. And Lizzo on her album, one of her albums, used this term. I'm going to put air quotes here.
Hmm.
Use bad, which in the U.S. I didn't grow up thinking that was a negative stereotype about the disabled community. I didn't grow up thinking that, but I didn't know. But in England, it's definitely a slur. And somebody made her aware.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh, okay. And she called up the producers. Hey, can we re-edit that one line? And that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
That's it. So one of the things that, we talk about cancel culture, and some people are very concerned about that. And I have the key to solving cancel culture. Here's the key. The
Amazing.
key, the key is if you do something and someone else's culture says, hey, that's offensive over in my culture, just be like, oh, I didn't know that. I'll try to be more aware and go about your business. And that's
Right.
it. That's so one of the things, I'm the child of an immigrant. Günther Herbert Siegfried Müller. Anybody want to take a wild guess where Günther Herbert Siegfried Müller is from? And so, in one of the things in the US that's unique compared to a lot of countries, I think China's an exception, Brazil's an exception, Russia's an exception, but most countries in the world, if you go 3 hours in any direction, you're speaking another language and you're in someone else's culture. I can go 10 hours in any direction and maybe make it to St. Louis or New York or Florida, but I'm still getting away with English. We all largely have sort of the same cultural touchstones, etc. So what that means is that in the US, we haven't gotten as culturally humble as we need to. Trust me when I say if you live in Switzerland and if you go 2 hours south, you're in Italy and it's another language and another culture. You go 2 hours north. And so as far as how do you deal with the difficulty of saying, well, you've got privilege? Well, just be like, oh, okay, sure. And I
Yeah.
still got to wake up Monday and go to work. And the other thing is, this is so important, is that none of our lives are easy.
Mhm.
None of our lives are easy. I'm a white man. I'm college educated. I'm cisgender, which is the opposite of transgender. I'm middle class. I have a lot of privilege. I joke with people that when it came time to get privilege, I went to Costco to get the 24 pack. The 24 pack, right? You have to buy like 500 tubes of toothpaste. That's where you go. And so, but that doesn't mean my life is easy.
Correct.
My life, I still have challenges. I still have things that I face. There are days when I am depressed. There are days when I'm jazzed. What it does mean is that at no point does my race make my life more complicated,
Hmm.
right? One of the hardest things is that, and Martin Luther King Jr. spoke about this a lot, and this gets lost in the shuffle because he's known as a civil rights advocate. But one of the things he said, poor white people and poor black people should be working harder together than they are
Yeah.
apart.
Yep.
And so one of the hardest things when I do workshops, and this does come up, is when I know white people who are experiencing poverty. That is it, because they don't feel privilege. You don't feel it. You don't feel it. You feel it when you don't have it, but you don't feel it when you have it, sort of. And so it's one of those things about, can we all just realize that what if everybody has privilege? First of all, because that means we're not pointing a finger at anybody, because everybody does. And what if all of us could each be a little more humble about our culture and a little more curious about other cultures? And there you go. And that's where we begin. It's not about this, you have privilege, so you are bad. First of all, I don't know any trainers who actually say that or believe that.
No.
It's sort of a myth about what happens in trainings, but some people leave feeling bad because if they're confronted with an idea that they've never thought about, there might be some guilt, there might be some shame. In my TEDx talk, my hook from my TEDx talk, I don't know if you've got a chance to see it yet, but I was working at a women's college, the oldest continuously operating women's college in the country. So like when the US is like, it's our centennial, this college is like, whatever, dude, hold our beer. We've been educating women since before you were a thing. But the hook from my story was the building where I worked had 2 women's restrooms with multiple stalls and 1 single-use all-gender restroom, which was the only place I could go to the bathroom. And as a guy, I had never waited for the bathroom in my life, ever.
Yeah.
Ever. And so if I had a meeting at 11 o'clock, I would leave my office at 10:55 because I've never had to build in time.
Yeah.
Sometimes I would go in, the bathroom would be locked, and then I would have to build in some time. And so it got me thinking a little bit about, and what I did was I thought about my wife and how my wife's been waiting for the bathroom for 48 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I did a little experiment in my TEDx talk. I got out my calculator. I was like, okay, what if about 40 times a year I'm at a Broadway show, a sporting event, a crowded restaurant, somewhere where one would have to wait for the bathroom? And if I multiplied 40 events a year times 10 minutes, how many hours do I have over my lifetime that I've not had to wait to go to the bathroom?
Yeah.
And then the question is, what could I do with those hours? If I know that women everywhere in the US are having to wait in line to go to the bathroom, could I do something for society that sort of supports women with my bonus hours? Like I've got bonus hours. I got bonus dude hours.
Yeah.
What can I do? And so to me, to your question, to me, when people feel uncomfortable, I'm like, yes, great. I feel uncomfortable too. We all feel uncomfortable. Let's feel uncomfortable together. And then let's just take a baby step of some kind of recognition about one thing that I've got that makes my life easier. There might be some things that make my life harder. What are those things? We all have some things that make our lives easier and some things that make our life harder. So let's just acknowledge it and let's just talk and let's just have a regular everyday conversation, and take away the shame and the guilt and the pointing fingers and whatever, because we're all in this boat. Yeah.
And no one's asking you to get rid of it. I mean, I think that's the other thing too. It's not, well, sorry, you live in a house, you now have to live in a 1-bedroom apartment, or whatever. And it's like, that's not what's being asked of people. It's acknowledgement and it's conversation and it's curiosity more than anything else. At least to me, that's what it seems like.
And curiosity, the thing you just said, curiosity is huge. The internet age has hurt curiosity in some ways. And so, I mean, I remember legit being at restaurants and stuff with friends in college. And have you ever had those conversations? Well, who was in that movie? Was it so-and-so or so-and-so? Right. And when I think about what was it like to just not be able to settle the argument at the restaurant, like we couldn't Google it. There was no mechanism. And like one could, I guess, go to the library the next morning and look it up, I guess. But we dealt with more ambiguity and more curiosity because we didn't have a device in our pocket where we could just be like, okay, who was in that movie with Marissa Tomei? We can't just do that. And so for your listeners, and when it comes to leadership as well, so this is interesting because this curiosity is this kind of root that can really help feed the intercultural and cultural awareness tree, but it's also a root that can really help the leadership tree in general, because it's the fostering the ability of leaders to ask what if, or what else can I learn? Those kinds of questions. And so curiosity is a critical component of leadership. And I think that we have to be careful with AI and I'm not anti-AI.
Me either.
I think that we need to keep AI in its toolbox where it belongs and use it as a tool per our direction to make our lives better, not to conquer the world or anything nefarious. But so I think that Google, the internet, AI is hurting our curiosity. And so we need to just practice more curiosity. We need to get more curious about things. Yeah.
And it's interesting. I'm like, for people who are just listening to this, I'm like nodding my head like a bobblehead. Yes, because I think I also, I'm sort of like a cusp Gen Xer millennial, like elder millennial, I guess is
Uh-huh.
sort of the term I use all the time. But it is really interesting. I'm not anti-technology. I'm not anti-internet. I'm not anti-AI. But we came from a generation, exactly to your point, of not knowing and really having discourse and critical thought and exploration within your groups, whether that was school, friend groups, whatever it was. And that was the pursuit. It wasn't
Yeah.
necessarily around getting the right answer.
Yeah.
And it's really great to get the right answer and having that ability to learn. But the other really interesting thing about AI is it's taking away from the critical thought point, like the actual working your muscle memory
It
and
is.
exploration. And like I love ChatGPT and I use it for a lot of things, but it is interesting how it is an echo chamber. Like
Yeah.
I'm talking to myself. And
Yeah.
I have to
Yeah.
remember that. I'm like, this
Yeah.
actually isn't critical thought. This
Yeah.
is, and it's super helpful for what I need, but I
Yeah.
still need to pick up the phone and call a friend and be like, check me on this, or can you listen to this, or how does this sound? Because ChatGPT, by the way, its name is Quill, and she's, yeah, girl, amazing. Love that for you. And I'll call my friend Matt and he's,
Too supportive.
yeah. And my friend Matt is, well, maybe look at it this way. And I'm like, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
I got to say, yeah. And something you're pointing at is that Gen Z, as a generation, they are really good at finding facts.
yes.
But where the elder millennials and the younger Gen Xers, because I know some Gen Xers that use technology more like the boomers do, and
Mhm.
that confuses me. But I guess the tech savvy Gen Xers and the older millennials understand that finding facts is one skill, knowing what are the most pertinent facts for the problem is a whole different skill. And so this is also, in media circles, left leaning and right leaning me, stuff like that.
Mhm.
This is also at the heart of that, which is I can produce for you a fact, but critical thinking is what are the most important facts for this challenge in front of us? Not just what's a fact,
Right.
and that fact by itself could be scary or daunting or seem simple or seem complex, but it's like what are the facts we actually need to solve these problems. And that's the when I used to supervise people regularly, those slightly older millennials, the people at the front edge of the millennials, they were the best because they were always about a step ahead of me on the new tools, but they were with me on, once we have the tools, what are the right things to ask. And so I love that about, and one thing I've said I did a presentation for a large leadership organization that's like an international thing. They actually wanted me to do improv comedy and executive presence was what they pulled me in for. But one of the things I told them, I said, look, we had the industrial age, we had the information age. Right now we're sort of in the disinformation age. And next is what I'm going to call the discernment age.
Mm.
Discernment is, it's not about what's true or what's false. It's about which truths are most important for this problem, facing society, facing my neighborhood, facing my household, whatever. And ChatGPT doesn't know that. AI can help you frame the problem, but it doesn't know what the most important things to ask are. That's
Right.
we still have to ask those things. Yeah.
And what's missing? I think that's always the big question for me is we have all this information, but what is missing from this conversation? And what questions are we not asking that maybe we should explore, even if we don't go down that road? So
Yeah.
anyway, we're getting off topic a little bit. I
Okay.
do
It's
want to
okay.
talk about, no, I do want to talk about your book, Leading with Emotional Intelligence.
Yes.
And, what's something you wish people understood more, or maybe some misconceptions, which we talked about a little
Yeah.
bit, but
Yeah.
tell us about the book a little bit, and what are you hoping that people get out of the book?
Sure. I think that for one, the word emotional, is a charged word. And, I'm a big fan of the Myers-Briggs personality type.
Yes.
And there's a book written by Isabella Briggs Myers, and her name's backwards, but there's a reason for backwards from the Myers-Briggs, but there's a reason for that. But in her book, she's talking about one part of the Myers-Briggs, which is thinking and feeling. And she cautions people. She says, because she grew up in sort of the post-World War I, entering World War II era, and she cautions people that emotion gets this bad rap as emotional or whatever. And that there's kind of like you were saying earlier, that from her perspective, in this workforce that was dominated by men, emotional was perceived as bad. And she said, when understanding feeling in Myers-Briggs terms, the thing to understand is it's not emotional, it's person centered. And so understanding that shifts those connotations. If you think emotional and you immediately imagine like a Hallmark movie or a Lifetime
Right.
movie, emotional, right? No, it's human centered. It's when we need to make decisions. Are we focusing on policy and logic first or people first? Honestly, we need to be doing a little of each, but in workplaces, the logic and policy end has been driving things for so long, and then employees get burned out, don't feel appreciated, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the shift in between these things is what emotional intelligence is about, is how do you get from a place where the driving questions are, how much is this going to make our shareholders? Is this efficient? These things that are left over from the Industrial Revolution, and keep some of that, but then also go, are our employees fulfilled? Are we training them in a way that's going to make them want to stay around? Are we compensating them adequately? Are we supporting work-life balance? There's something, when I made my transition, I never had work-life balance working in my previous career, and now I do. And it's like I do, and I almost don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
I'm like legit. I joke with people that with my company that every once in a while the boss will just at 1 o'clock declare that everybody needs to take a nap. And if you're listening and not watching, I just pointed at myself when I said the boss, because the company is me. I mean, I have team members and affiliates, but sometimes it's 1 o'clock and I'm just decide that I've been working since I get up at 6 a.m., start working at 6:30 because I can.
Yeah.
And then, eat lunch and then take a nap and then, go to the gym and then maybe do a little work in the evening if I feel like. So the work-life balance thing, millennials in large part drove this in the working world, which was, hey, employers, when you say, oh, we're meeting afterwards for this networking event, you're expected to attend. And millennials are like, expected to like I'm getting paid, or expected to like you're just expecting me to volunteer, or help me understand this, because I might have a life after work. I might have other things. The baby boomers are like, yeah, of course, that's where you network. That's where you do the things. You just have to do it. And the Gen Xers, we would do it, but then, be sarcastic about it the whole time. Angsty and sarcastic as we sort of mentally checked out while we were playing the role.
Some really great sitcoms came out of it. But
yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
But so my question too is, I feel like, and maybe this is just my perception, but I feel like we're in this backlash from companies though, of, and I think COVID certainly changed a lot of things, but it almost feels like there is this, whether it's return to work or, I read some company got rid of all of their holidays this year. I mean, I feel like there is this almost backlash that we're getting from corporate America to all the advances that had happened. And are you seeing that at all?
Yeah. I mean, it's sector by sector. And the other thing you got to understand is that in those races to the bottom, some companies are going to flip it and then they're going to benefit. They're going to have the best folks. And so there is that sort of economic supply and demand thing, right? When there's not enough people for the jobs, those employers are going to be more accommodating. So I used to run a career center at a few different colleges. And when you run a career center, and this is not, I'm not a data nerd, but I would read this stuff from the BLS, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, which is the thing that's interesting is they are always predicting 10 years from now, here's where the jobs are going to be. 20 years from now, here's where the jobs are going to be. So in the 90s, they were telling us, hey, United States, you're going to need a lot more nurses. They were right.
They're right.
By 2008, it was like, hey, the boomers are getting older. When I was looking at 2008, 2010 about the big growth jobs, it was almost all related to elder care and technology, and the intersection of elder care and technology. Like, we need people that can repair MRI machines. We need nurses. Still need nurses.
Sure.
We need people who know how to run the technology end of healthcare. And so this thing though that you're talking about is a little bit broken apart by what sector you're in, right? So if you're in the food service industry, you can flex, and you're an employer, you can flex your muscles right now. No pay, blah, blah, blah. If you're in the tech industry, if you're in healthcare, you can't flex your muscles. You're still rolling out the red carpet, right? There's this interesting thing about some industries still have to provide you a lot of time off and this and that. So it's sort of breaks down by what we call quote unquote high skill jobs. I have a love-hate relationship with that term, but we know what I'm talking about. The jobs where you got a technical degree, probably, or a graduate degree in some kind of technical thing, because those employers for the last 10, 12 years have been saying, we do not have enough people for these roles. We just don't have enough of these people. And so I think that there is a backlash in a sense, but also those backlashes tend to be short-lived
Mhm.
because in the internet age, employees can talk to each other.
Yeah.
Indeed, Glassdoor, etc. People can talk to each other about what companies they're working for and whatever. There are rankings of favorite companies to work for years. When I was doing career services, two of the happiest employees were people at Enterprise Rental Car and people at Costco.
Hmm.
They would do all these surveys and they would rate their employer as the best place to be.
Yeah.
And so keep in mind, in the 80s, we didn't get those rankings. I mean,
Right.
somebody in some business magazine may have read it somewhere, but the most of us, like the big
Yeah.
population,
Yeah.
now I can Google, is this company good to work for or
Yeah.
not? And so there's still that counterweight to this. But I think that in the service industry in particular, the companies are flexing their muscles because they can. So industries where there's more people who want the jobs, they can
Yeah.
flex their muscles. And industries where we need more people, they switch from flexing muscles to rolling out the red carpet.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'm also thinking about like with social media and in particular TikTok and how it has changed conversations between groups of people. And it's
Yes.
incredible. I think in some ways it's dangerous, but I think it's overall incredible in a very positive way. And also to see, to your point, like watching Gen Z lead the charge on some of these conversations. And it's, oh my gosh, like I never thought about it that way. So it's so interesting again, just like how we started this conversation of all these different groups coming together at the same time in the workplace,
Yeah.
and how
Yeah.
we all approach it and how we're thinking about it and how we're communicating about it. Can you talk about how do you help teams and leaders really talk about difference and
Yeah.
move that conversation instead of defensiveness to a more productive conversation?
Oh my gosh. One of the biggest tools I use is this thing called shared expectations. And so,
Mm,
what shared expectations is, when I work with a group, I get a big old piece of poster paper and a smelly marker. And I say, hey, we're going to be in this training for 2.5 hours, or we're going to be in this training for 2 days, or whatever the case is. And I say, what do we expect of each other in this space? What do you expect of each other? And so people will put up words like respect. People will put words like listening. People will put up words like giving grace. People will put up words like being present. And they'll talk about shared expectations. Well, here's the thing is that many companies have never had this conversation. Many teams have never had this conversation. So what that means is that everybody comes in with their own expectations about what's professional, what's good at work, what's bad at work, whatever. But we don't put them out on the table and say, what could we all agree to? I was working with a company. It's actually a company that makes flavors. So, for example, they told me they have 237 different versions of vanilla. So odds are pretty good. You have had flavors today that are manufactured in this company where I was doing some work. And
interesting.
I was doing harassment training, but we were calling it positive work environments. And I'm showing them some of their policy and we're going through this. And this guy goes, well, isn't this common sense? And I said, well, common sense is different to different people.
Yeah.
Now, in that room, I probably had 20 or so managers, and it was a pretty racially diverse group. And so I said, common sense, let's do a common sense check. Is putting raisins in potato salad common sense?
Yeah.
And every black person in the room looked at me as like, that does not seem, that's like a very white thing. And
Is this a trick question?
right. And then the white people in the room are like, well, I guess sometimes. I'm like, exactly.
Yeah.
Common sense. We all come from different cultures. We all come from I come from the culture of German people. I come from
Right.
the culture of whatever. I come from lots of different cultures.
Right.
And so common sense, now let's make sense together. So shared expectations, we can put your teams can take, and it does take some facilitator skills to do the active listening, combine certain concepts, but you create a list. And then the next phase is after you've created a list, you ask everybody in the room, hey, so however long we're here for this training, can you commit to bringing all of these? Because if there's something up on the list, like sometimes people will put smile up on the list. Great, we're brainstorming, smile, smile. And I'm like, okay, let's check ourselves. Before we commit to this list, now let's cut things that we think we all can't commit to. And so smile, somebody will say, I don't know that I can commit to smiling the whole time. I'm like, cool, let's cut it or change it. Do we want to call it attempt to have a positive attitude? Because that's something we could all agree to. Attempt to not have a positive attitude, but attempt to bring a positive attitude. Can everybody commit to that? Yes. And then if smiles result, that's great.
Yeah.
But we're not going to compel people to smile. And so creating shared expectations is a way groups can take charge of their own culture. Every group has a culture, but teams' cultures are made up haphazardly like a collage, depending on all the cultures of all the people in the room.
Yeah.
and we should sit together and talk about it. Now, I will say some organizations do what they call shared values. I like that. But values can mean different things to different people. Trust me when I say on the hot button issues of the day, whether it's gun control, abortion, whatever, that everybody on all sides of those issues values freedom and safety, but in different combinations for different issues.
Yes.
And so values are great, but shared expectations are, how do we want to have our values in action and how we treat each other? And then what I usually leave groups with is, I'm like, okay, so I told you this was for the 2-day workshop. You can keep this.
Yes.
You could use this for the next 6 months and then revisit it and add some things to take away. You could use this indefinitely. That way, what one person thinks is common sense and what another person thinks is common sense aren't going to bump into each other. And we're going to have shared expectations, what we know we can count on. That's one of the great ways to help organizations have conversations they're just not having.
Yeah, and move through it. So I love that. I did this with a team that I managed, and everybody felt really good afterwards. And we put our shared values and expectations at the top of every agenda that we had so that we could really look at it. And are we living up to these values? And I got really frustrated, frankly, as a manager, because there were people who agreed to it and weren't living it and weren't practicing it. And I don't expect a 100% batting average or whatever. I don't expect a 100% rate. But it started to become a conversation of, is this the right place for you? It's okay if you don't want to embody these values and expectations that we've brought in together to get the work done. That's okay. Or maybe you've changed in that time frame. But I think there's also that personal responsibility of understanding, maybe this isn't the right place for me. Maybe this isn't the right environment. And I think it gets back to that Venn diagram, right? Like thinking about, you know what? And I actually Lisa Appia, who I just had on the podcast, talks about introverts and how introverts can lead.
Oh my
And
gosh.
talking about how you have your strengths, so many strengths, frankly. I think we need more introverts actually, and bringing that strength to the workplace. But part of what she talks about is this the right environment for you? And understanding that. And I think that's something that people need to understand. And what made me think about this is your comment on the smile, because you might commit to smiling, but it's going to lead to resentment if that's not your thing.
So, oh my gosh, can
Please
I share?
Get in here. Yeah.
So when I do work with Myers-Briggs, the most commonly understood is the extrovert introvert thing, but it's understood, but it's also misunderstood. Because all it is someone's preference, right? And so preferences, I don't like cauliflower, right? Yeah. That's just a preference of mine. I'm right-handed, but look, I got a coffee mug here in my left hand, and I could, right? So sometimes people think introverts can only do this or extroverts can only do this. It's not about what you can do. It's about your preferences.
Yeah.
So even though I don't like cauliflower, if I was stranded on a desert island and the only food source was a cauliflower bush or tree or vine or whatever that comes out of the ground, and then 3 years later, the Coast Guard finally finds me, and I've got my volleyball Wilson, and I've got my, as they got me onto the boat, I'd say, thank you for rescuing me. And can I share with you my 5 best cauliflower recipes? Where, so it's not about aptitude. It's not about how good you are at something. It's about preferences. But I love that you mentioned the smile, because I'm going to tell you about something I do.
Yeah.
I break people into introvert and extrovert preference people. And I try not to say introverts and extroverts, but I fall into it a lot of times. But I'll say people with introvert preferences and people with extrovert preferences, because we're all complex humans, but we do have those preferences.
Sure.
And then I'll turn to the people with the extrovert preferences and I'll say, look at your introvert preference neighbors. Has anybody ever heard the phrase resting Mitch face with an M? And they're like, what? I'm like, resting Mitch face with an M. And they're like, no. I'm like, that's not a phrase in our society. You want to know why? Because men can be introverted and people leave them alone and nobody's policing their smiles.
Yeah.
I'll follow it up by saying I've been alive for 51 years. I've never, ever in my life yet had a stranger say to me, oh, honey, you need to smile more.
Yeah.
Never in my life have I had that experience. So what I'm saying is that, and I say to the extrovert leaders in particular, I'm saying, look across the room at anyone who's a woman. They have probably been accused of the thing that rhymes with resting Mitch face. And then pause and look, are there also Black women over there? Because they get all of those stereotypes, plus the bonus ones like attitude or this or that, or a Latina women or whatever. So introverts, we need to start appreciating introverts in a different way, right? Yeah. And understanding that people with introvert preferences are living in a world of stereotypes created by extroverts. It's just how it is. I also ask people, this is hilarious. I'll turn to the people with the introvert preferences and I'll say, how many people, or I'll just say to everybody, how many people here wear headphones in public without listening to anything. Half the introverts will raise their hand. And then the extroverts are so, I had a guy last week blurt out, why would you do that? Like he says, he just blurted it out. I'm like, dear extrovert people, guess what?
Yes.
Sometimes in introvert land, they want to bring a social barrier with them to be left alone. It seems nonsensical to someone with an extrovert preference because for me, like headphones are for listening to things. That's the only function. And so even this understanding is emotional intelligence when you think about it, where each of us has a preference. No preference is better than the other. The preference doesn't mean we can or can't do things, but what it does mean is leaders can support their teams differently. So one quick example, if you're a leader who has people with an introvert preference and one of those people has to do a presentation to a group of customers or a presentation to your board of trustees or whatever, after they have to do that presentation, don't schedule 3 meetings right after. Schedule some downtime because they're going to be worn out. Similarly, if you got people you're supervising who have extrovert preferences and you know they have to do this 8-hour report where they got to sit at their desk for 8 hours, hey, twice before lunch, once at lunch, and twice after lunch, pop in, talk for 5 minutes, get them a cup of coffee.
Right.
Give them a little human interaction in between so that their battery, this is all about your battery training or recharging. So it's not that extroverts can't do that or introverts can't do that. It's that when you're doing that, the best leaders know that I got to make sure their batteries are getting recharged along the way if they're doing an activity that drains their batteries. It's that simple. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this sort of dovetails nicely. Also, for the record, raisins don't belong in potato salad. I'm just putting that out there.
I agree.
You can say I'm judgy. It does not belong there.
I'm on your team. Yep.
So the first time I heard that, and I am an extrovert, I was like, what the hell? Who puts raisins in potato salad?
Who would do that?
But that's why we have diversity.
And that's why, and going back to that shared expectations thing, you could do a potluck and you'd be like, who's bringing what?
Yeah.
But you could also be like, hey, let's talk shared expectations about potato salad for a second. And then just go around the room. And if a third of the people are like, we put raisins in them, and the other 2/3 are like, no, don't let them sign up for the potato salad. They can bring fruit salad because if they like raisins, put some raisins in your fruit salad.
There you go.
So, but shared expectations is just making the things that we assume public so that we can talk it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so you've talked about Myers-Briggs, and maybe if you can give just sort of a little for listeners who may not exactly know, or actually probably more importantly, if you think you do know what Myers-Briggs is, can you talk about that a little bit and like how those tools actually should be used by leaders and teams? Because so often I think, and I'm guilty of this, you take the test, you do strengths quest, you do whatever, disc, whatever, and everybody's feeling so good and it's awesome. And then you've got the report and you got to go do this thing and I got a phone call and blah, 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 whatever. What is it? And then how should it actually be implemented?
Yeah. Well, so part of the reason I love the Myers-Briggs is because some of these other assessments, so StrengthsFinder, DISC to an extent, these are trying to measure your strengths, what you're good at.
Yeah.
If I took a survey, if I took a quiz, a personality quiz, and it asked me how good of a dancer, singer, and driver I am, I would give myself a 10 out of 10 for dancing, a 10 out of 10 for driving, and a 10 out of 10 for singing. If you ask my wife to rate me 1 out of 10 on dancing, driving, and singing, she would give me 110, 7, and then 2. I'm not gonna tell you which ones are which. Well, the 10 is singing. She'd give me a 10 for singing. But so aptitude tests are a little unreliable. I might have an inflated idea of how good I am at something. But the Myers-Briggs is not asking me how good I am at something. It's just asking me my preference. When you need to recharge, do you recharge from the outside world, extrovert, or do you recharge from the inside world, introvert? When you absorb the world around you, the second letter of the Myers-Briggs, people may have heard the term sensing or intuition. Those are the two. You can either be sensing or intuitive for your second letter. The second letter is not about your energy. That's extrovert, introvert. It's about how do you absorb the world around you. This is one of those ones that for managers is huge. People with a sensing preference have a preference towards give me a list, give me an outline for my project, give me the standard operating procedure. I want something, give me a syllabus with details if I'm a student.
Yeah.
That's what the sensing people are most comfortable with. Intuitive folks from a supervisor might be like, if you give me a detailed list of every single thing to do, I'm going to feel like you don't trust me and I'm going to feel like cramped and I want some freedom to explore things my way. I need you to frame it. Give me the big picture. Give me the big picture budget, the big picture political things I got to be aware of at the office, and then let me go with it. But if you give me too much detail, I'm going to feel stifled. And so there's this thing, and this is part of emotional intelligence. Every one of us either has an intuitive preference or a sensing preference. And we're probably managing some people of the opposite.
Yeah.
And so we have to be more aware. I used to intentionally, and this is the key word here, I would hire people. I'm an intuitive.
Mhm.
I'm big picture. Sometimes I don't get to the details, etc.
Yeah.
I would hire people that I knew were more sensing
Sure.
because they would catch the details, etc. And when they're not stressed, sometimes I would challenge them. I would give them a project with some ambiguity. But when they are stressed, when it's their busy time of year, I would give them the outline that they so desperately crave. And so sensing and intuition, that second letter of the Myers-Briggs, is so much bigger than people imagine, because every audience you speak to, half of them want data and charts, the sensing crowd, and half of them want a story that connects to their life and makes meaning for them. That's the intuitive crowd. And so the best presenters, the best public speakers, the best salespeople, the best lawyers managing a jury, the best people who are trying to communicate with a group understand that if I'm an intuitive, I better get fluent in the language of sensing.
Mhm.
If I'm sensing, I better get fluent in the language of intuition, or else I'm going to lose. Half my audience is not going to be with me. Half my audience is going to leave thinking that guy gave us a lot of fluffy metaphors, but I didn't learn anything. Or the other half is going to be like, well, he showed us 10 different graphs and charts, but I still don't know how that applies to my life. And so you got to speak to both audiences, right?
Yeah.
And so the reason I like the Myers-Briggs is that when kept in its proper context, which is not how good you are at this, that, or the other, it's just your preferences, unlocking and understanding the difference of each preference, like the extrovert, introvert, getting them to understand each other better, sensing and intuition, getting them to understand each other better. That's building more emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
I show this picture to groups a lot, and the pictures are a really complex picture. And I ask people to describe what's in the picture. People with a sensing preference, they list everything they see. There were 3 bluebirds, 1 blackbird, 2 children sitting on a rhino. There was a girl behind a rock, and numbers, colors, positions.
Yeah.
The intuitive crowd describes the picture as there's 2 children on a journey through the wilderness, and there's a woman behind the rock who's about to attack them.
Yeah.
They're reading into the picture, and the other people are seeing what's on the picture. And then I ask them to compare each other, and I'm like, their minds are blown
Yeah.
at what each one of the other group has observed in the picture.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, if we had that much trouble with a picture, imagine when your boss comes in and says, we need to do this initiative, this. Half of you heard a big picture thing, half of you heard some details. Each of you is probably missing the other, and we need to work on that. So that's why I love it, is that it's only measuring preference. And I can tell you my preferences. I do not prefer cauliflower. I do prefer coffee.
Yeah.
My preferences are mine. I don't have to, you don't have to take it on faith that I'm a good driver.
And I think it's also it's important as well with the aptitude versus preference
Yeah.
of preference isn't right or wrong. I like
No.
coffee and I like cauliflower, not together, but I just don't like olives. I've talked about this before. I really want to love olives. I just don't like them, and it doesn't make me a bad person. It's just a
Now,
preference.
one of the things though, and Isabel Briggs Myers wrote about this in her book. Her book it's the hardest title to say. It's Gifts Differing. But she wrote about it. Gifts plural, gifts differing. But one of the things she talked about is that if folks are familiar with the Myers-Briggs, the ESTJ, extrovert, sensing, thinking, which is logical, and J, which is sort of organized, that's a short version of it, that the ESTJ was dominating the workplace. T was an INFP, introverted, intuitive, feeling perceiver. And she's like, where is there space for us? And so she typed about, some people say the type A work personality. That's this ESTJ thing. And so I think that it's just important we can use this understanding of preference, but just like you, I agree with you 100% that liking cauliflower or not liking cauliflower, that's a preference. It's not good or bad.
Yeah.
Coffee, preference, not good or bad. But Isabella Briggs Myers says we fell into thinking that the ESTJ was good. That kind of leader was good, and that other kinds were not as good. And we can rewind to my conversation about, showing emotions in the workplace.
Yeah.
And so some places have been given the unofficial good label, and they shouldn't.
Yeah.
No preferences are better than other preferences. Yeah.
And even in this conversation, and I don't want to go off on this tangent, but even in what you just said, there is privilege in that. There is privilege in and acknowledging that. I am usually an ENFP, sometimes an ENFJ, depending on the day that I take the test. I'm sort of borderline on that. But it's so interesting because, again, I have seen where I have privilege because I'm an extrovert. I'm
Yep.
white, I'm blonde, I smile a lot. Like
Yep.
I can talk to a wall or 500 people. And in the
Right.
industry I'm in, that's important.
Yeah.
And that's a privilege that I have, and that's totally fine. Me
Yeah.
acknowledging that also allows for others, especially sort of the opposite letters, they have a role and a purpose as well. And it
Yeah.
often, to me, the privilege is shut up. Like, or
Right.
let other people lift their voices up, because it's not like I'm intentionally doing it. But the
Yeah.
reason I get called upon is
Yeah.
because we've deemed those as good qualities.
Yeah.
And they are good qualities, but there's
Yeah.
other good qualities.
Exactly.
It's so I love all of this tying together. And if listeners walk away with just maybe one shift or how they think about leadership, what would
Mhm.
you hope it is?
So I think that one of the things I would say is that leadership is open to everybody, and that
Mm,
leadership is not about titles. And so, when I worked at the oldest continuously operating women's college, I started a first year leadership program. We didn't
mm,
call them freshmen because it's first
sure.
years. And after it was like once a semester we would have, I don't know, 12 to 20 students. And after the first 1 or 2 semesters I offered it, people found out, the word got out that this was an introvert friendly space, that people with introvert preferences would be valued for who they were, that they weren't going to be sort of forced to think about some extroverted version of leadership, forced to participate in, that we were creating the activity. It was very experiential, kind of like high ropes, low ropes, but
Yeah.
indoors, if you can imagine. And so that they weren't going to be forced into things that made them uncomfortable, that they were going to be, that the learning environment was going to be built around small group conversations a lot of the time, things that built them up. And because they were living in a world where, and gosh, I've got a lot of degrees, so I've seen a lot of syllabuses or syllabi, and every time I ever saw class participation 20 points, I'm just like, woohoo, yay, free
Yeah.
points. And I did not understand this until I started studying this, that people with introvert preferences read that and might have anxiety about it, might start spending mental energy. How much time am I going to have to talk? How much do I really need those points to get the grades I want? Anytime one group is spending mental energy on something that another group does not have to think about, that's privilege, right?
Yeah.
And so extroverts, yes, the world celebrates extroverts. And so I'm always saying to people, I'm saying, dear people who have an introvert preference, you know how in a meeting, when one extrovert says something and then three more extroverts say the exact same thing, and you're so annoyed by that?
But we're
No,
so smart. No, I'm just
right. We have to be on the
gonna-
record. I tell them, I'm like, two things. Number one, extroverts, I want you to understand us. We want to be perceived as being on the record.
Yes.
That's why we repeat it.
Yeah.
So I turn to the extroverts. I'm like, hey, extroverts, here's some other ways you could get on the record without taking up a whole. You can just say ditto. Or if you're in the South, you can say amen. Or you can
Yeah.
just be like right on, or
Yeah.
whatever your thing is. And then I turn to the introverts and I say, by the way, dear introverts, when there's a concept that's come up, your supervisor might not know if you agree with it or support it, because once someone has said it, many introverts assume, well, someone has said it, that's good. And they don't have a preference to be perceived as on the record. Dear introvert folks, you get promoted at a lower rate than extrovert folks. Maybe you should go on the record. And it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be elaborate. You don't have to re-explain everything because that wastes time. You just be like, I agree. Or I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
Just give one little phrase to say, I'm yes. Because if you're thinking it and not saying it, your supervisor doesn't know. And when it's promotion time, the people with extrovert preferences are going to be perceived as go-getters and engaged and whatever. And the people with the introvert preferences are going to be perceived as less engaged, even though they're totally engaged, just not in a loud way.
Yeah.
And so you've got to sometimes, take it out there,
Yeah.
say your things. Yeah.
Put it out there just a little bit. And I think for all my extrovert friends that are so excited to high five each other about ideas, watch who isn't and ask. Be
Yeah.
like, hey, Alan, what do you
Yep.
think?
Yep.
And it could be as easy as saying, yeah, I agree. Or you're opening up the opportunity to see something differently.
Oh, yeah.
And again, that's just something that I've had to learn. But it's also, you have to know the personalities, right? Because doing
We
that for
do.
some people is, oh my God,
We do.
they're going to run out of here. So
We do.
maybe it's a conversation later. Hey, I just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page after the meeting or whatever, or that sort of thing, opening up that opportunity in different ways and knowing your team and knowing your colleagues, because it's not necessarily we can all be leaders in different ways. You don't have to
Right.
manage a team in
Right.
order to be a leader. So
Right. And
I,
go ahead.
no, please.
I was just gonna say, I love your after the meeting thing, and I'll just say you can also do a pre-meeting thing.
Yes.
One of the things about people with introvert preferences, and so anybody who's listening who has an extrovert preference who's managing introverts, is that when a topic comes up for your team to talk about, people with extrovert preferences, they just externally process. That's just what happens. People with introvert preferences internally process first a rough draft, then polish up their rough draft, then maybe they'll say it if three extroverts haven't already said it.
Yeah.
So if you stop by, yeah, I know, right? If you stop by before the meeting, and I used to do this with my last big team, I would stop by a few offices on, hey, just so you know, I only emailed the agenda 30 minutes ago, but when we get to sections 2 and 3, I really want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
And even just me telegraphing to them in advance, we're going to talk about that. That gives them that time.
Yes.
When I do workshops, I hand out index cards. And when I introduce a topic, I say, write your thoughts on these index cards. Okay, now who would like to share? People with introvert preferences, if you just give them the 2 extra minutes to write their thoughts down and externalize them, it's going to be way less scary for them to say them out loud. They're going to contribute more. And also I tell the extroverts, hey, extroverts, count to 30 in your head, which, spoiler alert, is only 10 seconds because you don't like silence, but give it a shot. And so, yeah, so there's a lot of understanding that we can get between just on the introvert extrovert dichotomy that can just enrich us so much more in the workplace, because it's about building understanding and understanding that not everybody is like you, and understanding that what's normal on the other side of the room is very abnormal to you, and owning that and going, that's weird to me, but let's work this out. Let's talk together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, outside of the professional setting, it's also asking, when you think something's abnormal, it's like, how does this impact my life at all? I think so many times we just want to have an opinion. And I'm like, it literally doesn't affect my life whatsoever. Like when I get cranky or friends get sort of cranky about things, I'm like, so what? Who cares, actually? Like, why am I focusing on this? Move on. I'm not going to make raisins in the potato salad ruin my day. It's just whatever.
What's the big stuff? What's the big stuff?
Exactly.
There's a great book by a woman named Jean Kummerow, and it's about Myers-Briggs types and how to manage your own stress. And then I also have an online course called Building Emotional Intelligence. And in my online course, I go into this in depth because there are 16 different Myers-Briggs types, and there's sort of 4 big clumps or categories, and each of those 4 categories deals with stress in a very distinct way. And so I took stuff from Jean Kummerow's book, and then I took it through like the lens of all the teams I've worked with, and made this thing that's in the course about how do you manage not only your stress but also the stress of other people, like your team members, because each Myers-Briggs type has its own flavor of how we all, when we're stressed, we catastrophize and we go into the rabbit hole. Each Myers-Briggs type has its own flavor of catastrophizing. And so if managers can understand that and then be on the lookout for those behaviors, like mine, I'm an ENFP. Yeah. And so in Jungian terms, they call it the inferior, but Isabella Briggs Myers calls it the blind spot, the thing about you that you don't know. And my blind spot is sensing, which when it's part of someone's type, it means they can look at a list and have good memory recall, or look at a picture and tell you how many birds or how many trees or whatever. That's not part of my type. And it is the thing that when I'm under stress shows up like a 5-year-old throwing a temper tantrum. And I have a 5-year-old Alan who wants to catastrophize and make everything worse, but does it through a sensing lens, which is, I'm going to focus on one thing my wife said 3 years ago and stew about that.
Yeah.
Or one thing my boss said 2 weeks ago, and I'm going to stew about that because it's one little fact. The sensing people are good at recalling lots of facts. I suck at that, but when I'm under stress, I pretend I'm good at it and just torture myself.
Yeah.
Right? So anyway, so if people are curious, I do have an online course that explores how you can find out your type, how you can make sure to use it the right way and not use it the wrong way. And then the last 3 sections are like, how do you manage stress? How do you use it as a leader? And then how do you use it interpersonally? Because, oh my gosh, first 3 years of my marriage, I'm married to someone with an introvert preference. First three years of my marriage, I was always asking my wife, are you okay? Are you mad? What's wrong? Are you okay? I'm like, oh,
not anymore.
Not now that you've asked me 20 times.
Yeah.
Because I didn't understand, because to me, as an extrovert person, silence means there's a problem. But to introvert people, silence is just the air they breathe. It's just very natural and normal. And so I tell people, if we're going to use this in emotional intelligence in relationships, I say, dear extroverts, stop asking so much. And dear introverts, those extroverts that you care about, affirm them a little extra from time to time. Yeah. Many introverts will think these nice things about their best friend or their significant other or whatever. and they don't say it out loud, I'll tell them on their birthday. Right. You can tell them a couple times a week, and the extroverts would be fine with it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love this. I could talk to you for like another hour. It's so great. You'll have to come back to the show.
Sure.
But I am also very fascinated. So you're a singer, trombone. Is that your instrument?
Trombone,
did I read that correctly? Yep.
Singer, improv comic.
Yeah. Improv comic. Do you it's so fascinating. And if you want to talk about it at all, please do. Sure. And does it impact how you show up every day? I mean, I'm curious about that, sort of the musicality, the timing, the relationship with your audience.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things that I'll bring into it. I'll talk about servant leadership and band for a second.
Sure.
But then I'll also talk about improv and job preparedness.
Yeah.
But so I was a band geek all through high school and college, marching band. Met my wife in our college marching band. She was on the drum line. I was a trombone player. Love across a crowded field. You know the story. And so, but one of the things that when in the study of leadership, there's all these different ideas about leadership, right? And I've studied all the academic ideas, the pop culture ideas, and then my own experiences. But one of the things that I love about young people in marching band is this is a real example of servant leadership. And what I mean by that is if you're performing in a musical, like at theater kids, when you everything you're practicing is for a show that people have come to watch. They've come to watch the show. Marching band young people are wired differently. They bust their butt in the hot sun to perfect an 11-minute show for an event where everyone has shown up to watch football.
Yeah.
And so where people have not shown up to watch the band. Now there are bands that are competitive and that's amazing. But overwhelmingly, 90% of the young people doing band are putting all this blood, sweat, and tears into this activity to play this show for an audience that did not come to see the show.
Yeah.
It's right.
It's a great point.
That's an example of servant leadership, because if you've ever been to a high school or college football game where there's usually a band and the band's not there, it's like fall break or something and the band's not there, those games seem eerie. They're like, well, it's something. And most people won't name it. They won't be like, well, there's no band here. But most people would just be like, that game, the crowd just wasn't into it or whatever.
Yeah.
Not that the band gets the crowd into it, but just having a band there gives the crowd freedom to be into it.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so one of the things, so I'm a performer. When I was in college, I was the one white kid in a 90-piece black gospel choir.
Uh-huh.
So that was an amazing experience. I learned to sing, and that also changed my life in terms of different intercultural things that I've engaged in. And then improv, I fell into improv, 15 years ago, did it for a comedy club for almost a decade.
Wow.
But I also integrated it into my practice. So I ran a career center at college, and career centers, it's boring. I mean, there's no, resume work is not sexy. Yeah. Preparing for an internship is not thrilling. Like it's just not right. And so we got to teach these little mini classes, like a 4-week intensive class, what we called a January term. And so I decided that I was going to teach a class called Improv Comedy and the Art of the Job Interview.
Love it.
Because every job interview you'll ever do is improv.
Yep.
And I would tell students, as I'm trying to convince them to sign up because it's a new class, nobody knew about it. I'm like, hey, think about it this way. If you can, by the end of this class, if you can do a scene that's about Beyonce, Nicki Minaj, and Joe Biden arguing about who left the ice cream out on the counter because they're vacationing in Brazil together, if you could make that a scene, tell me about yourself is going to seem so easy.
So easy, yeah.
Tell me about where you imagine yourself in 5 years. That's going to be so easy. And so what it was about is teaching the rules of improv. And I used to think improv was just creative people being creative. But there's a lot of rules. There's a lot of rules. And also one thing I'll share that I learned about myself, one of my biases that I had to unpack a little bit. The college where I was doing this happened to be an autism spectrum friendly college. So in the autistic community, we were sort of a college that was known among autistic folks going to college. And the first time I had an autistic student sign up for my class, I was used to getting these notes from the dean's office saying, this student needs an environment free of distraction. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is an improv class. I could just call this class Distraction 101. This is an exercise in distraction.
Yeah.
And I had a little bit of anxiety. And let me just tell you, overwhelmingly, the autistic students and the students on the spectrum were the best improvisers of any student.
Interesting.
Overwhelmingly. Yeah. The main thing is because autism is a very broad community with a lot of diversity. But one of the more common shared attributes is the reading of body language is different than it is with what we call neurotypical people, which I don't even love that term, but whatever. Yeah. But the reading of others' body language, there's more filters to it and there's more thought to it. That's a huge asset when you're doing an improv thing because people like me, I'm reading my scene partner's facial expressions and then getting in my head and getting nervous and worrying that I'm not cool or worrying that I'm not funny or whatever. And many of those students, autistic students, were like, yeah, no, I'm following the rules that you gave us the last 2 days, and I'm not going to get in my head about the facial expression of my scene partner. And it was amazing, amazing. So anyway, so I've used improv in that practice. I also use it with executives. There's a large organization called the Center for Creative Leadership. They're an international leadership organization. Their number one client is the US Pentagon. And so, but they happen to be headquartered in the city where I live. It's dumb luck because they're also in like Dubai and Colorado Springs and Belgium, and they're all over Shanghai. They're all over the world.
Uh-huh.
Their headquarters happens to be in Greensboro, North Carolina, just
Wow.
dumb luck. And they brought me in to work with their faculty who do all these trainings on how to use improv comedy techniques to improve executive presence or leadership presence, which is leaders are expected more and more to communicate to large groups and to have stage presence and not get the disease and have, and so there are techniques that you can learn because, again, kind of going back to that class, after you've done a scene about, Lizzo arm wrestling with Bruce Springsteen to see who wins the official Harrisburg, Pennsylvania arm wrestling challenge or whatever we've come up with.
Right.
After that, doing a pitch about your company or talking to your employees or talking to your shareholders, it seems less scary. And so we practice, how can we stretch all the different rules of improv you have to juggle and get you to a different level of comfort with juggling different ideas so that when you come back to the ideas that you know well, it's that you have that much more confidence in presenting them. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, again, I could just keep talking to you. I'd love to have you back on. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to mention or make sure people know?
I mean, I would love to share. I wrote a book.
Yeah.
And the real quick backstory is about 25 years ago, I thought maybe one day I'll write a book about leadership. And I am not very organized. I'm an ENFP. I'm not naturally organized. I'm not a journaler. And so what I did is I created an email address called allansleadershipbook@gmail.com.
I love that.
And over the last 25 years, anytime I saw a politician, someone at a place I worked, a colleague, a community leader do good leadership or bad leadership that sparked my brain, I would send that email address a random email with a little story. Oh, I just saw this politician do this. I think that's really good leadership. Or and I did that while getting 3 degrees, the last of which was a doctorate in leadership. And I never, for 22 years, I did not open that email. I didn't open it. I just sent random thoughts over 22 years to that email. And then 2 years ago, I opened it and I was like, oh my gosh, I've got enough for 3 books in here.
Yeah.
And so I had all this material. And so anyway, so this book is, the thing that I'm most proud of about this book is that it is grounded in some things that are sort of academic, but it's not an academic book.
Yeah.
So I live in these worlds where there's this academic thing where everything has to be cited and justified and everything has to have 5 sources. Yep. And then I'm like, yeah, and I've been working in the field with leaders for 25 years. And in some ways, I'm also just a source. And so this book it's very conversational, gives you real practical tools, tips. And literally I published it, I think, 2.5 months ago. So this is brand new. I just did a book signing event, which is cool. And I'm like, I don't know why y'all want me to sign the book, but because I'm a Quaker and my ego, I don't have a whole lot of ego. But people are like, will you sign my book? I'm like, yes, I'm not that guy, just so you know. But I'm happy to sign. But so I have this book out there. It's called Leading with Emotional Intelligence. And a lot of the things we've talked about here, it just goes more in depth.
That's great.
Yeah.
And where can people get the book?
So the best way, if you want to support me putting my kid through college, is to go to my website, adaptivechallengeconsulting.com, and adaptivechallengeconsulting.com, and go to the Knowledge Center. You see my book there. I've got a colleague's book there. That online course I mentioned is there. There's like bundles too. But you can also get it on Amazon. And then we're also on Ingram Spark, which supplies a lot of local bookstores. And so, it's out there. There's also a Kindle version. And my dream is to pretty soon make an audiobook because I'm a huge audiobook person.
Yeah. As
an extrovert, I love an audiobook that I can listen to while driving, listen to while working. So coming up soon is the audiobook version. And as someone who has been a singer and an improv person, I have my own voice talent right here in my house because it's me. And so, so I'm going to be able to do that pretty soon, which is exciting. So, and my next book I'm working on is called Improve Your Leadership, except improve, the E is grayed out. And so it's Improv Your Leadership.
Love it.
And so it's about how to use improv comedy to enhance your leadership techniques. So that book is literally in outline form right now as of 2 weeks ago.
Nice.
So that's the next one on the horizon.
Oh, that's awesome. Congratulations. congratulations. And we'll have the your website and all that information in the show notes. So if
Awesome.
people missed it, want to get the book, you can find it there. So this has been so much fun. You have so much energy. What do you love most about what you do?
The thing I love most about what I do is the light bulb moments, is that I get to be in a room with people, and sometimes it's 10 people, sometimes it's 400 people. And when I can get them to have a light bulb moment, one of the things I do when I speak to a group in my intro slide is I show them the FedEx logo, FedEx, like the delivery people. And I say 25% of you are going to have an aha moment right now,
Yeah.
which is there's an arrow in the negative space between the E and the X in the FedEx logo. And about a fourth of every audience has never seen it until that moment. And so I say to them, I say, well, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is you've seen the arrow. The bad news is you've seen the arrow.
Right.
You're gonna get a package later. The arrow will be there. You're gonna be driving down the highway and see a FedEx truck. The arrow will be there.
Yeah.
My goal when I'm doing public speaking and workshop is that there's something you perceive, there's something you see, there's something you hear, you can't unperceive. There's a
Right.
new idea about, do I have privilege as an extrovert? Is the fact that I'm a man different? If there's some aha moment, and I love, love, love the aha moments. And as someone who's an extrovert and intuitive, a lot of times I can observe the aha moment in the body language of the people in front of me. I can see the light go on and when they turn to their neighbor and like, oh my gosh, I never realized that. And I live for those moments.
Yeah, that's really special. And what advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh my gosh. I knew that question was coming. And the advice I would give my younger self, I'll say my younger self on my entrepreneurial journey,
Sure.
which is don't operate out of fear, operate out of I want to say faith, not necessarily in a religious sense, could be religious, but operate out of fear, don't operate out of fear, operate through faith. And again, I don't mean faith to be expressly religious,
Sure.
but belief. And that could be belief in yourself. That could be belief in God or the spiritual, but when on my entrepreneurial journey, there were a few times when I operated out of fear and it didn't translate. It did. Whatever's making sense of the universe, whatever the cosmic flow of things are, it didn't flow right. And when I operate out of faith and passion and curiosity, things flow right.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll say faith, passion, and curiosity. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And then how can people find you and work with you?
Oh my gosh. So one of the places I spend the most time is LinkedIn, Adaptive Challenge Consulting on LinkedIn. If you're curious about my Etsy shop, is more active on Facebook and Instagram, and that's Happy Place Designs on Facebook and Instagram. But I'm on LinkedIn. Also, you can find Alan Mueller, and find me on LinkedIn and connect with me. I know that different organizations, everybody has different challenges, right? And if you're listening to this podcast, I hope that you're getting from me that I only deal in what's practical. Like my job is to get us to practical solutions and not always just the academic, not always just the pop, but what's the blending of those things? Because I want our work environments to be better. I want us to understand each other better. And I've had some amazing supervisors and I've had some not amazing supervisors. And my dream is that your whatever organization you're part of, that you're investing in not just your supervisors, but the future leaders. That's the thing. Look to your right, look to your left next time you're at work. There's a future leader there that could be doing some learning about how to be a more emotionally intelligent leader. They could get the books, they could take the course. Your team could bring me in. I've also got amazing affiliates that work with me, a team of 5 people that I bring in for different folks that have different needs,
Yeah.
And so get in touch with me on LinkedIn and my website, adaptivechallengeconsulting.com. And if you're curious about the Etsy shop, Facebook and Instagram and Etsy, you can find me there. Yeah.
You're doing it all. I love it.
Doing it all.
This was such a fun conversation. Thank you for sharing your expertise and your energy. And like I said, I could just keep talking about you. We didn't even talk about student affairs, which is a podcast in and of itself. So
I know. Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.